Lia Izenberg, how are ya?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So I'm going to
Thanks
try
for
to
having
start
me.
with a little bit of an intro this time so the folks actually know who we're talking to. So you and I first got introduced by a mutual friend who I think was a board member at your nonprofit. So you were the founding executive director of One Goal, which is a nonprofit you can talk a little bit about. And through our conversation, we realized that you were about to head on sabbatical, which I thought
Yeah.
was pretty funny. So we kept in touch after that.
hmm
But now you are launching, and we'll talk a little bit about it as we connect here, but you're launching a coaching and advising practice. So I would love to get a little bit more into that. But welcome. So how did you come to take a sabbatical? Where did that idea come from?
Well, I joke that my husband and I dared each other into it because we had been talking about it. We did when the economy crashed in 2008. I had been teaching for 3 years. My husband was just finishing up law school, and he took the bar, and he was about to start at a new job. And then they were like, we can't afford to bring you on right now. Come back in January. And so we were like, oh, we have this opportunity. They had given us, I don't know, several $1,000s, to kind of supposed to tide him over until he could start. And so we left. We put all our stuff in storage. We went for a 4-month, the kind of backpacking trip you can't do anymore, but this was like before smartphones. And we just kind of set off for 4 months in Southeast Asia. And since then, we've been talking about it. And truthfully, like we hadn't had more than a week or two of vacation together at a time since then.
Mm.
And since then, we'd had many more jobs, and we'd had a child, and we'd bought a house, and we had all this other responsibility. But we thought we've been talking for a while about doing it, and the stars started to align. I started to feel like I could walk away from my executive director job that I had kind of started to feel like I had done what I came to do, started to feel complete, I guess, with it. And at the same time, I started to get excited about doing something slightly different. And so it was a moment where there was an opportunity to pause.
I didn't know about the earlier trip, so I want to hear a little bit about that. But first,
Oh
like,
man, it
what
was
is it?
awesome.
What did it feel like to you to know that your time had kind of run its course? Because from my personal experience, I feel like I wasn't listening to those signals, and I went too
Yeah.
far and got into burnout land. Is
Yeah.
that actually how it went, or is that how you think about it looking back?
No, I think it did kind of go that way. I think I started to see the signs, and I'd been there before. So I started to see the signs of burnout, like feeling like less engaged, a little bit of, I'm like a super emotionally connected person. And I started to feel like a little more emotionally disconnected. And I was like, oh, that doesn't feel good. Where, you kind of like end each day being like, ugh. And there's still so many things I was loving about my job. And I think had my husband not like pushed really hard, I probably would have stayed for another year, and it probably would have been fine. But I also feel like um, I really wanted to leave on a high note. I wanted to leave, especially at a founding executive director job. I wanted to leave when I could hand, a new executive director, like a full pipeline of funding, like we were on top. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to wait till I'm like limping along to take this time. Because I also was like, I don't want to be at that burnout place when I go on my sabbatical either. I want to be able to have energy and enjoy it. It took me longer than I thought it would to unwind anyway, but it was that. It was a little bit of like, okay, I could stay. I could totally do this for another year, and it's also time. So we wanted to kind of do it. And I will also say, like, my son, it was like the right time for him too. Like he wasn't in school yet. He was a little enough that it felt like we could just, drag him around with us, which we did.
Yeah. So how old is he? And because I think a lot of parents feel like there's never a good time, and so what made that like a good time for y'all? And how old is he?
Yeah, I mean, he was 18 months when we left, or 20 months when we left, and he's now like 2 and some change. So he turned 2 on our trip. And I thought, he's not in, it was logistically inconvenient, for sure. It's never easy to travel with a little kid. And my husband and I still look at each other like, can't believe we pulled that off. It was wild, in so many ways, and so different from when we were in our 20s and backpacking and had just what we had needed on our backs. And it was so like low key. But we just were like, we're not, we wanted him to see the world also. Like COVID had meant that he hadn't had that many experiences, and we wanted him to get out there and kind of experience the world. And it was pretty cool to see how much he changed even just in those 6 months.
That's awesome. Yeah. How long was it between your first sabbatical with your husband and this one?
Oh gosh, 12 years or something like that. Like we went in 2009, the fall of 2009, and this was the fall or late summer of 2021. So yeah, I can't do the math. 12 years. Something like that.
Cool. So what were your kind of lasting memories from that first one? What do you feel like changed?
Oh man. Well, that was like a time where, we had the Lonely Planet, and it was like, I'm going to sound like I'm going to really date myself, but I'm an elder millennial. So we didn't have smartphones at the time. And that was really, I truly, I think, was able at that time to like unplug. Like we were just out there. We were just making decisions on the go. We were so like, and it was cool too, because it was a time when you could go to Southeast Asia and buy these plane tickets. These like Air Asia plane tickets for $15 the day before and fly all over. So it was just very much fly by the seat of our pants. At the second sabbatical, we were a lot less spontaneous, but we did it. And we had spontaneity where we could. But the first one was really about like just fully being present in this, in this brand new place. And we were backpacking, we were like reading in hammocks for whole afternoons. It was amazing. Wouldn't trade it for anything.
And so as you were thinking about this one, what were y'all's intentions? Do you remember?
Yeah, no, I do. And we actually did a whole, we took a day in January of 2021 to like set intentions and do some visioning, which my husband was not into, by the way. He was like, what? We don't need to do that. And I was like, come on, we got out like this like chart paper. So I used to be a teacher, so it's very much the teacher in me. But yeah, our intentions were really, my husband really wanted to he'd been working really hard for 12 years with no break. And so for him, it was about like disconnecting and like rediscovering who he was outside of his work. He's one of those people who's like not super attached to work. Like he definitely like works to live, and he loves so many other things outside of work and is very, very connected to them. So he also wanted to like build deeper connections with our son and with me. And then we wanted to just like experience again what it would be like to just be living without like being hyper scheduled. So that was a bit of the intention. And for me, I think I had other intentions. One was to really like sit with and reflect on my professional journey and think about what was next. So I knew I was going to start a consulting and coaching practice. I knew that I had learned in my professional work that I like got the most joy out of like really sitting with leaders and helping them think through both their internal leadership capabilities and kind of like their blockers and sort of the emotional side of leadership, as well as the like strategy piece. And I knew I wanted to do something with that, and I was good at it, but I knew that I needed to like really actually give myself time to reflect on what had been like kind of a wild ride. And I also wanted my nervous system to like down regulate. I had just been in these like stressful jobs. Our journey to having our son was really intense and stressful. We had just like bought a house in the Bay Area a couple of years before, which was stressful. Then COVID, all the things like my nervous system was up here, and I needed to like down regulate so I could just be present to do the work that I knew I wanted to do, which was to really like sit with folks through challenging moments in their leadership. So I wanted to do that, and I didn't know exactly what it would look like, but I wanted to do that. And then I wanted to like end the trip kind of being grounded in my next move. My husband was like, I don't want to think about work. I don't want to do anything work related. I'm not touching it. And he didn't. He truly didn't. He's like that good at that. But I had those intentions as well. And then a whole bunch of other stuff came up that I hadn't even been intending for, but I would definitely say like we met our intentions. Or they came to fruition, I would say, and a whole bunch of other things. We also wanted to see a bunch of friends and family who we hadn't seen in a long time and spend quality time with them, which was pretty awesome.
Yeah. So I'd love to see the intention setting exercise. It's always good to kind of like collect those things and share with folks. But you said a lot of other things came up that you weren't expecting. So Tell me about the time.
Yeah. Well, like I was saying, I think it took probably 3 months. I don't know about 3 months. It took it because it wasn't like it was just 3 months of intensity to like kind of come down from what had been just like a really intense job. But it was like, it started up here and kind of slowly titrated down.
Mhm.
But I keep telling people that, like the first couple months were like emotionally intense. Part of it was, I think, that I was just, like I said, my like probably cortisol levels from just years of just intensity were up here. So there's that.
Mhm.
And then the other part was just the fact that I think had a lot of emotional things come up and just the usual stuff, right? But like deep relationship stuff and just things kind of happen and processing through that I hadn't really like fully processed. So when you give yourself the space to do that, they come out. It's like when you give yourself the space to like detox, if you ever do
Mhm.
like a diet detox, whatever, cleanse, it's kind of like not cute for a while and then it gets better. So I would say like there was a lot of emotion that came up. And at first I was like, whoa, this is wild. Like, what's going on? I'm like, I'm chilling. Like, it should be easy. I mean, the first couple of weeks, by the way, of our trip it was really harrowing. We were like driving 2 weeks, took 2 weeks to drive from here to Michigan. And it was just like kind of wild. When we got to Michigan, I thought, okay, now we're going to really breathe. And it was amazing. And it was very chill in a lot of ways. But I would say in my head, it was not so chill. And just all the stuff was coming up that I was just like, whoa, hey there. Oh, damn, you're still there. I thought we worked through that, and I was also kind of in the process of trying to detach my personal value from like needing to be productive all the time. So it was work emotionally for the first couple months, and it started to kind of calm down after a while. And I would say like halfway through, I got to a place of feeling like very much different. I lost the thread, but that was surprising to me. That was surprising to me. And then I was like, oh, cool. One of my intentions, or one of the things that happened that I didn't even know was going to happen, is I kind of like completed some of my emotional work, I would say. I talk in my like blog about work, like our capital W work, like that we have in our life. And so like, I feel like I integrated and completed some of that on the first part of the trip.
Yeah, our definition of a sabbatical is like extended intentional leave from routine work. And so it's that like routine piece that is important. So, setting aside your role as the executive director, and then there's still work to do, right? And there's still like work that could look like a job to other folks, but it's not. It's like getting a break from that thing that was, that kind of like rut that you had been in for a long time, or like working in for a long time. You had
Mm-hmm.
said in your blog post, which I'll share kind of in the show notes or the comments, that you read the book on burnout, which is like, I think, a pretty intense and tough book to read, like right when you're feeling it. But what did you kind of learn as you were coming down off of that
Yeah.
cortisol high, and like what best practices would you share with folks? Like what worked, what didn't work?
Yeah. From that book, I just learned the importance of actually completing the cycle is like their whole thing, right? Like you completing the emotional cycle, like stuff comes up and you got to actually like work it through. I have always been like a big exerciser, but I think I had let it slide a little bit with the pandemic and having a baby. But I was very consistent on my sabbatical, or like every time my son would go down for a nap, I would do even just like a short workout. And I think was starting to like feel emotions come out in that through the movement. So for me, I was like, oh yeah, like this is like, I got it, again, completing the cycle and like journaling. The other thing I did a lot was I did a lot of writing. So for me, lost you for a second there. For me, a lot of what felt really important to do was to actually process my work through writing. Like my journey. And so I wrote a lot of blog posts. You had referenced one of them. I have a bunch of other ones I haven't published yet, but those were some ways of kind of like making sense of and processing through my experience. And I think the book helped me realize the importance of that, and actually like the neuroscience behind why it's important to do that,
Mm.
which helped me, I think, and will help me prioritize it differently. For me, it's so like the neuroscience, behavioral brain science pieces of this is like, yeah, of course it's like important to process your emotions, but like, oh, like here's exactly why and what happens when you don't. That was really, really helpful. And I also realized just how good I'd gotten at not doing that, to just survive in a stressful job and with a young kid, and kind of how good I'd gotten at like pushing things to the background.
Yeah. Yeah. So the next thing you talked about in the post was you talked about committing to ease. And so, going down from this place where you were in work, and then like giving yourself kind of permission to not be acting in inaction. How did that go? And what would you recommend?
Well, how to go and how it's going, because I
Yeah.
think my goal with it was even after I started working again, I really wanted to make sure that I continued to like hold that sense of ease.
Mhm.
And I think part of what I meant by that was just like being cool with and being comfortable with the liminal space, like the unknown, like not needing to feel like I need to do all the time,
Mhm.
and constantly do. Um, and just allow myself to also just be, and to allow like things can be hard and also easeful at the same time. That was like my yoga example that I gave of like a pose can be hard and you can also like breathe through it. You can also like take full breaths. You can also enjoy it. You can be in the process and feel the challenge of it, and also see the beauty of it, and approach it easily. So it's like a different way of moving through the world. I think I'd been like conditioned, like so many of us are, to just like be a hard driving achiever.
Mhm.
Um, and I gotten really good at that. And I think I hadn't really thought about the cost, like what the cost was to me,
Yeah.
until I was like really deep in it. So yeah.
Yes, you're alluding to, some difficult parts you had to breathe through, and stuff that came up during the course of the sabbatical. Like, do you want to share any of those? I don't want to dig too deep, but what kind of things were coming out as you were, off ramping from professional life and starting to explore like yourself and what you wanted to do next?
Yeah. Yeah. One of them was my relationship with motherhood. And I think that, man, my like journey to being a mother, and also my like birth experience, like both of those things were pretty intense. And like I would even say at times traumatic.
Mm.
Um, by the way, you're freezing like a tiny bit. I'm just going to keep talking until you tell me to stop. Okay. So I'm
Yeah,
assuming
go
you can
ahead.
hear me. Okay. Okay.
I think it's
Everything was a little bit,
yeah.
it's okay on your end.
Yeah, I think it's on your end. So just go ahead.
Yeah,
It'll be fine.
it was a tough, okay. It was a tough transition. I think that that's like pretty typical. But I think as mothers, like we hold a lot of guilt for kind of even just like examining those things. Like we're taught to only want like examine and think about the beautiful parts of becoming a mother, of which there are many. And there's also a lot that's really hard and challenging. And I think, and I mentioned this in my blog post, I'll say it here too. Like I had to I had to forgive my own mother for some of the things that I've been like holding on to. Right. And I had to look in the face, like where some of that, like some of the like stickier parts of my motherhood experience were coming from, and really sit with that. And like, so that was interesting. And I think I was with my son 24/7. So like there was no more hiding from any of that. I was not going to get away from it. It was like right there. Um, and so I had to be compassionate with the parts of myself that found some parts of motherhood challenging. um, I would say I would imagine there's not like a single mother in the world who doesn't feel that way, but I had been mean to myself about feeling that. I had been like really hard on myself because I was like not loving every second all the time, and I was exhausted sometimes and frustrated sometimes. And so the journey was getting to a place of compassion where when I get that way, I can just be like, oop, I need a break, I need a moment. And also again, like having compassion for my own mother. Now I see her need for that kind of space differently. And then I mentioned, I mentioned to you, this is not my blog post necessarily, but my relationship with my best friend is like so deep, so deep. And she and I had a little bit of like a hard year. She was moving back to her hometown. I had lots of feelings about that. Part of the reason that she was moving was to be closer to her family. And I felt rejection when she moved. This is just like tip of the iceberg. Like there's so much more underneath it. But I think we just had like a lot of a hard time, and we were still in that place of tension at the beginning of the sabbatical. And I think but I think what I love about my relationship with her the most is that we like stay in it. But it was stickier than it had been for our whole relationship. And I had to just be with it because like there was nowhere to hide. I had to sit with it. I had to be with that and be like, oof, this feels really hard. And like, I had to really come through that. And I had to kind of do it on my own. Usually I would do it with her, but I had to do it on my own. I had to self-soothe in a way. And I had to practice my like secure attachment with her in this way that was like, so like, ooh, there were hard days where I was like, I really wanted to escape it. I wanted to run away, but I couldn't because I was just, that wasn't my life. That we were just kind of together and out there and at this time we were in Lake Michigan or on Lake Michigan with my family's house. So I think it was that. It's right. It's like, as things were coming at me, as things were coming up, I had to sit with them and I had to make my own peace with them. And I gained some new skills in doing that, that I'm proud of.
What skills? I mean, you talked about another in your piece is becoming your own teacher. And so, I think the knee-jerk reaction for folks is like, oh my gosh, like I need to read a book, or I need to talk to a therapist, or I need to get some sort of like counsel on this. How did you balance those two competing desires to fix it?
Well, I mean, I've done a lot of therapy, right? So I have a lot of tools in my toolkit to like handle stuff. But I would say what I meant by becoming my own teacher is that I think there's a way in which I'd been conditioned. This is like part patriarchy, part just like who I am, part the types of roles that I've been in, to like look outside myself for answers and to need someone else to tell me. So whether that was, and I think that's a strength sometimes. Like I'm very good at going around and getting input on things. I sort of lost what I thought, and I started to not trust myself and started to trust that other people had the right answer and that I just needed to find it. I had to get to a place where I was like, no, actually I'm my number one cheerleader. Like I'm right. Cause this is what I think, and like reconnect with my intuition a little bit. And instead of shopping around, like opinion shopping or kind of just like needing feedback all the time or validation, to be able to provide that for myself. Like that came up when I was writing copy for my website, when I was thinking through, what I wanted to do. Like, it was like, hey, you know what? There's no right answer. Actually, like, and I just need to be like, you know what? Fuck it. Sorry. I don't know if I can swear, but like, I'm putting it out there. And I believe that it's true. So I had to show up for myself in that way. I hadn't had to do that. I had, as an executive director, you think like, oh, this is like an executive, like she obviously had to do that. But I had a lot of people I could call to be like, gut check stuff and constantly be like looking for reassurance. And my husband provided that a little bit, but he's also much more like, hey, you got this, so I had to provide it for myself. Yeah, it was great. It was hard though at first. Now it's great.
Is there something specific about being on sabbatical that everything come up, or gave you a chance to address it in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise?
I mean, I think it's just spaciousness, you know? I mean, I think like you provide yourself the space and like stuff will come up. And if you're someone who, I mean, I'm sure some people go on sabbatical and don't have that happen, right? But
Mhm.
if you're a deep thinker, if you're an emotional person, if you're a seeker, you know, like all of a sudden there's empty space that you're, and I had been, you know, living and breathing my jobs for the past, like even before I was an ED, you know, for my whole life and career. Um, to the point where so I think it was just like having space. And man, I will say like again, the first 3 months were hard, but it all came together at the end of my trip in this way that was so
Mm.
beautiful. And I just felt like I had actually reached another level of understanding, like some kind of enlightenment. Of course, like, you know, now I'm back in my life and those things are still there, but I was like, oh, everything makes sense now. Like it makes sense why I was struggling with the things I was struggling with. Like it all kind of integrated towards the end of the trip. When I wrote that piece and was like, here are the things that I would say I really learned. And I had to just
How
be
did
in it. I had to give myself space to be in it.
Okay, so you just basically said you achieved enlightenment, so now I'm gonna ask a bunch of questions.
No, no,
Um,
don't hold me to that. It was a moment. It was a moment
I
of
know, I
enlightenment.
know. No, I mean, in my sabbatical, I kind of made this commitment to give people updates, like monthly updates or something, which I thought was a huge mistake. I ended up getting stressed out about it and feeling pressure about something that probably no one read anyway. But how
Oof.
did you think about like writing and like when you put stuff out there and like not putting pressure on yourself, but having that kind of come out of you?
I mean, that's a really good question. That was something I grappled with. I mean, in a meta way, I was like, again, I was on this journey of trying to decouple myself from needing to be productive. So I set some goals, but and like those thoughts came up of like, oh, you're not doing enough. You need to be doing more. And I just used it as an opportunity to be like, no, like I'm not getting involved with that. You know, it was like an exercise in just being. Um, when something came up that I wanted to share, like I wrote that article on my first blog post was like, what is your work? That
Mm.
came the impetus for that was a hard conversation with my best friend. Um, I wrote that piece and I felt compelled to share it because it really felt true and it felt raw and and I had total vulnerability hangover after I put it out there. But I shared what I felt compelled to share. And I told myself, like, if someone finds this helpful, then it's worth it. One person finds it helpful, then it's worth it. But I tried not to set like hard and fast goals around what I would produce. I struggle with that a little bit. And I did have one client when I was on my trip, and that ended up
Mm.
being like a really lovely break from childcare, constant childcare. So I ended up really liking that. It didn't feel like work because it's just been fun. But yeah, I tried not to set a lot of goals, except to just like read. I did set a goal around books. Like I wanted to read 25 books, which I did, and I wanted to exercise every day or do some movement every day, which I did. Um, Other than that, I didn't let myself set goals.
Nice. Achieve that goal. Um,
Yeah.
so you mentioned one word that I wanted to come back to, and then I want to ask you about tarot card reading. But you talked about being a seeker. So I feel like I identified as being a seeker, and like it's on this trip, it was kind of playing to that where I had things that I felt like were always urgent with work, but like the important side of me, like the spiritual side of me, wasn't getting its due time, and so that was the main goal and focus of my sabbatical. I'm playing with this idea of sabbatical archetypes. So when people kind of come to me for advice, I feel like pretty quickly I can
Mm,
like sort them into a few different categories and then try to, you know, tailor the advice to
love
help
that.
them. Yeah. And so I feel like this seeker is definitely one of them. And then there's like a an explorer. So maybe when you were in your backpacking sabbatical, like it sounds like y'all were just looking to like unplug and just like see new things, right?
Totally. And I did not even bring a journal with me on that trip. I didn't do any journaling. It was all about just eating food and reading books and hanging out. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily tied to age, but I do think it's easier to just be an explorer when you have fewer responsibilities and,
100%.
less pressure and things like that. And then I think there's also this achiever mindset of, I talk to folks a lot who are like, I'm going to write a book on my sabbatical, or I need to get like yoga teacher certified, or like they have some like thing they need to come back with. So it's interesting that you talked about kind of being a seeker. So then it's like external seeking, kind of like what you want to do with your life. And then it's like internal seeking about like who you want to be, or like, even like you said, rediscovering like who you were, that kind of stuff. Right.
Yeah. 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 I think there are these opportunities in our lives where we get to kind of like, I mean, I use the term integration, right? Which just means like all this stuff has been happening to us and around us, and we've had all these experiences, and like, what do they mean though in the bigger, like, capital A agenda of our lives, right? Like I'm a deep believer that like we have our work in this life, like one, and we're always doing that, whether we're like hustling at a day job, whether we're on sabbatical, but you need these pauses to be able to like integrate the learning and actually make these like step changes along your journey, right? Versus just like kind of humming along. And so to have like, and like there are these moments where we plateau and we're kind of doing stuff, and then we have these opportunities to kind of like advance our learning, like one big click up. And so for me, like seeking is just about like seeking moments and experiences that allow that integration to happen. And what I would also say is for me, this is not something I would have said before, but I'll say now, like that it's about being with, like truly being with and being present to what is coming up. Because I think in our day-to-day lives, we do everything we can to like avoid. And that's just our society, but it's like meditation, for example, is about like being with whatever comes up. Like, I think they're like, in a way, it's like this giant one long meditation in being present to whatever is kind of arising. And so, so that's what I think seekers do, they're looking for more information. They're looking for meaning, seeking meaning, really.
Yeah, no, I love that step change function. So I've thought a lot about ways to describe this that resonate with folks. So I think about, for someone that has a hobby, like I noticed you said you play guitar a little bit, right?
I dabble.
And so, yeah. And so like, how does one get from a dabbler, and I don't know actually how good or how often you play, to being able to like enjoy it at a new level? Because I grew up playing guitar, and I feel like something like that, something like, dancing, right? There's a certain amount of like skill and practice and training that helps you get to like a whole nother level, where then you can kind of take off and develop at a higher clip than if you just kind of putter around with it every once in a while. And so, I've thought about it as, step change function, or like escape velocity, like getting out of like an orbit. But I think this like step analogy is quite good. Where like, how do you create the opportunity for you to kind of like level up? Thinking about it as necessitating a pause is interesting.
I think so. I think it depends on what your goal is. I definitely think with something like guitar, or something like any sort of new skill, I think it's, I'm there's people have written many, many books on this, but like consistency, right? So if you're doing it 5 minutes a day, it's better than if you're doing it 1 hour every week. And I think that really changing up your whole routine can allow for that, and I think seeking, or like, I think at this point, I'm like an experienced seeker, right? Like I can drop in to that space very easily in the middle of my day. For someone who's like, I haven't done a lot of introspection, I don't really know what's going on in here, I've just been doing, you would need to create consistent structures around that. You would need to create space for yourself to just sit with whatever is in your brain, whether that be meditating, journaling, tarot, whatever it is. So, yeah. So I think it was that. It was like, yeah, I could do a little, a weekly tarot reading. I could do a little journaling here and there, but to really be sitting every day with stuff that comes up, and to have to like really be with it, whether it be on the 15,000 miles we drove, a lot of that was like Daniel Tiger was going on in the background, and like turning around and giving my kids some cheese or something. But there was also a lot of just like, staring out the windshield, just like thinking. So yeah, I think that again, it's just having that space. It's just having that space. And if you're seeking deeper meaning, you have to create space to do it. It's like my friend, I have a lot of artists in my family, and they all say like to really make art, you have to go to the studio and just like stand there, sometimes for hours and do nothing, or just like doodle. And then like maybe something will come through you. We can't go in and be like, okay, I got 30 minutes, I'm going to make a piece of art. It's like not how it works, you know?
Yeah. I want to play with this notion of like creation and consistency a little bit, because obviously everyone who's been on a sabbatical has been on a vacation, right? But not everyone who's been on a vacation has been on a sabbatical. And so there's something about like the extended nature of time that is special, right? So the equivalent of like staring at a piece of paper for 30 seconds versus 3 hours. So if we talk about consistency being key to acquire and like level up a skill, but also like this just magnitude of space and time of a sabbatical being important, like at various points in our life, like, do you think there's something that you can be doing to further, to kind of receive the same amount of growth that you get from a sabbatical? Or is it more like this is your retreat that you come back to every decade, and then, you kind of like, consistently feed into it or play off the learnings, and then you have to like revisit and have a big chunk of time? I'm not saying this as well as
I think, no, I totally get it. I mean, I was going to say, I think it depends on what your goals are, I think, my husband had worked for like 12 years really hard. And he would get these like we had vacations here and there, but like he takes these like 3-day like solo backpacking trips every year. And he can get a lot of fulfillment from those 3 days alone.
Mm-hmm.
I need more than that. I need more space than that. So I'm like, I can't, I got to have more than that. So I think it really depends on the person. For me, I think it would be hard to recreate what a sabbatical does in like little chunks. And there's research out there, even by the way, that says like even like a 1-week vacation is not enough. Like you need a 2-week vacation to even just like stop thinking about work. Yeah. So I think that for me, I'm like, my husband and I, we got back and we're like, okay, when we're going to do this again. Right. And I was like, 100%, like when our kids are, we hope to have another kid, maybe they'll be in elementary school or something, and we'll take time. I think you need the step change to really make progress. Now, that's not to say like if you don't have capacity, I mean, it's a privileged thing to be able to do. Like we made no money for 6 months. It was not a paid sabbatical. We spent down a lot of our savings. It's not for everyone. But like, so I think you can create these spaces if you're really intentional. Like say every month you take like a Friday and you just go off by yourself and you create this space. You're going to get something different out of it. But I think, and you might need like when I go and do that, I do a tarot reading because that's like my tool to drop in and kind of like make progress faster. That's different than having like true spaciousness to see whatever comes up.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've talked about sabbaticals as like an analogy, like to psychedelics, right? Like
I was going to make that analogy too, but I was like, I don't know how down we are in this interview to talk about that.
I mean, you already dropped the F-bomb, so all bets are off.
It's also pretty different, but anyway.
No, there's research that shows that you can like achieve like the same kind of like brain chemistry for a short period of time that you would get decades of meditation. And so like obviously you can't, like, you're not going to be able to just be on psychedelics all the time, I don't think, but it helps you kind of get there quickly. So like using that tarot to like drop in, but you have to create that space, that like larger retreat, to know like what it's like and how to get there and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And again, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, right? If you're just trying to get an insight, you might be able to do that in a day. If you're trying to get a capital I big set of insights and change your sort of ways of being and ways of showing up. I will tell you, like, we got back from our sabbatical and we had brought bed bugs back from Mexico, which was like one of my worst nightmares. And my husband was like, wow, you're so chill about this. I was like, I was like, I had some like equanimity, like a new level of equanimity. We got in a car accident like a week later, like stuff was happening. And I just felt like my reactions were much more downregulated than I would have been like We have no bed bugs, by the way, anymore. They're gone. We still don't have a car back though, but I think that it did change. Those things are fundamentally changed. I don't think I could do that after a week even, honestly. So I think also, DJ, I will say too, like part of what's great about a sabbatical is like, for me at least, like, so my husband went back to the same job afterwards and he was like, man, it's kind of weird to come back to the same job after the experience we just had. I had this, like for me, it felt like this launch into a new thing. And it's like a physical manifestation of the change, right? Like I actually get to live out some of that change. Whereas if you're going back to the same job, you have to really be so intentional about how you like live out those changes because you'd be around the same set of stimuli.
No, totally. I mean, going back to the step analogy, right? Like getting you up to a different plane where you can kind of continue differently. And I think going back to the same thing that you're doing before is tough. I think it's tough because you're more liable to slip back into patterns that weren't working for you. You're with a lot of folks that probably don't understand the experience that you just went on. And so jury's still out on kind of how to do that the best. And I found, especially folks who are working in like the tech community, who will use like kind of product development cycle as their excuse or like cadence for taking time off. Like it helps for them because they're going back to the same job, but they're kind of like starting a new miniature job inside of it. Right. Same with like consultants. So that's helpful.
Yeah. I think that's right.
So how did your husband get the time off?
Well, he had been at his job for 9 years at the time. And so he just said he's kind of made himself invaluable at his company. And he just said, like, I want to take an unpaid leave. And they were like, okay. I mean, I think it's unusual, right? Like he didn't expect that. But they were like, yeah, I mean, I think they wanted to keep him. I think he made it I think they understood that between the lines was like, Matt was like, I'm prepared to leave if they say no.
Mm-hmm.
He never had to make that quote unquote threat, he never had to share that ultimatum, but I think they understood, and they were cool with it, which is really great. And so it was really great for us to know that he had, like, would have income on the other side of it. And we had rented our house, but like I said, I mean, traveling is expensive and we spent a lot of money, and having a kid is expensive. And it's not, the way we did it is not a cheap way to do it. We were all over the place. So
how did you think about how much money to spend? And because one thing that I think a lot about, especially living in the Bay Area, it's like yes, it costs money to be away, but if you compare it to just like the regular monthly costs, it can be a lot lower, if not saving money.
Yeah. I think on average, we probably didn't spend more than we would here. Like if you think about our mortgage and all of that. And like I said, we had renters who were covering our mortgage for 4 of the 6 months.
Mm-hmm. But just the income isn't coming in.
Yeah. We basically had a bank account where we're like, okay, like we don't want to run this down to 0, but if we did, we would be okay. And I made a little money here and there. And basically ran it down to 0, almost. But I think, we really like, we had saved a lot of money because we didn't want money to feel like a constraint. And we did what we could to be frugal. Like we stayed with friends and family a lot. But we had to stay in Airbnbs. We had to do like, we took a couple flights and we just, we decided we like weren't gonna not do stuff. There were things we didn't do because they were too expensive, or places we would have stayed. We tried to, stay in cheaper Airbnbs. But it all worked out in the end. And ultimately, like I have never regretted money that I spent on an experience. And we knew we wouldn't regret it. And we were like, this is what we saved for these 12 years, you know what I mean? To be able to do this. So it was probably the best money we've ever spent.
And just a little bit more detail. So like, how long had you actually saved for? Because a lot of folks will say like, there's no way I could take a sabbatical financially. But, if you are actually saying like, I will take this in 5 years or 10 years, it becomes a little bit easier to stomach. And then second part of the question is, how long had you kind of budgeted to to stay away, or did you give it like a more flexible boundary?
No, we'd budgeted for 6 months, but I didn't think about the fact that like when we got back, my husband started working again, like he wouldn't get a paycheck for like 3 weeks. You know what I mean?
So you really cut it close.
We got it close. Yeah. How long do we save for? I mean, we're good savers. So I don't know if I have like a number of years. Like after we bought our house, we had to like start saving again. So it had been like several years. And we were just saving every month and kind of putting money away, which is again, a privileged place to be in. And then of course, like it would have been harder if we hadn't rented our place, but things felt there. By the way, there's a website called sabbaticalhomes.com, which is, you can, you know about this. Someone told us about
Sponsored
it. We found
by
a great
Sabbatical
renter.
Homes. Yeah.
I know. We found a great renter on that, which was really, really helpful to have that covered, because otherwise you're like paying for double the places. And I will also say, like when we were like 25 and we went to Southeast Asia, like we spent very little money for 4 months. So like it is very possible to go places and have an incredible experience. We were mostly in the US because we had our son and because of COVID, but we did spend a month in Mexico, and that was like great because it was a lot more affordable. And we went out, to dinner every day, and it's amazing. Mexico is just the best. And definitely like you can take your toddler to Mexico City. It's amazing. He loved it. We had a great time. So I think that there's ways, and I think that like there's so many different formats like that this takes. And even if we just gone to Michigan for 2 months and stayed in my family's house, it would have been worth it. That when people ask us what our favorite part of the trip was, I think we'll say Puerto Rico or Mexico. Those were amazing, but Michigan was something really special because I haven't stayed up in our like lake sort of family cabin for that long before in one stretch. And so even if it was just that, like I would have done it again.
Unforgettable Michigan. What's the slogan on the on the license plate?
It's pure Michigan.
Pure Michigan. Yeah.
It is a pretty amazing place. I think the Midwest, so
Yeah. No, Lake Michigan's incredible. We used to go there in the summers. Okay, so we've talked about it. We've beat around the bush, but I'm super curious about the tarot card stuff. So tell me about like what was it telling you? How did that kind of practice develop over the course of your time off?
Well, I will say that I didn't use my cards as much as I thought I would until the end of the trip. So I had brought them with me. I was carrying them around everywhere. I used them a few times here and there because we were staying with lots of friends and family, and people always want readings. So I did a lot of readings for other people, which is always fun. But I mostly use tarot as like an insight tool for myself. And I think like I had been using tarot a lot, like leading up to the sabbatical and leading up to the choice to take the sabbatical. So like what the cards had been telling me, like pretty strongly, like different like archetypes, use the word archetypes before, I would be like pulling up were about like, okay, this is your moment to like break off and do something entrepreneurial, to be your own teacher, to like step away from sort of the structures you're used to kind of operating within and kind of be more like an entrepreneur solo out there in the world, and rely on your own knowledge, like kind of telling me like, okay, you've done the work. Like you've been doing this work for 15 years. Like you have something to share now. And it was also telling me to be fully expressed. So some of the like the writing I was doing was like, I was bolstered by just knowing like, okay, I have knowledge to share. I have wisdom to share. So then I didn't do a ton of reading on the trip until the very end. So we were in Mexico at the end of the year. We went to Tepoztlan, which is like a pueblo outside of Mexico City. It's gorgeous. And there's like really incredible energy there. And I typically buy this course from this teacher that I follow. Her name's Lindsay Mack, and I buy her like end of year sort of reflection course. And it's like a series of different readings to do, and kind of like, she does some lectures, and I've been doing it for the last several years. So I did that. And that was like where I spent like hours doing tarot under this tree on this property that I was just like, this is a magical place. And the energy was just like so good. And I really went deep there. And I'm like pulling up, I'm like, what? Where I was kind of like pulling cards for the year, and kind of like doing some like deep reflection on kind of how I changed over the course of my trip. And really feeling like so grateful for the opportunity to go on my sabbatical, feeling like I truly had to like come through a threshold of learning, like this portal, and was like entering kind of a different phase of my life. Like it felt like this like closing of a chapter and a reopening of a new chapter. So that was a really cool. There's so many ways to use tarot. It's just like, I don't know. It's pretty fun. Somehow I'm going to figure out how to integrate it into my consulting practice. gotta
do it.
Figure that out. Yeah.
I mean, it's super unique. And I also think we've had a bunch of folks recommend Enneagram assessments recently. And so I feel like folks in general just want other lenses through which to view themselves and other, ways to help thinking about themselves and events. So I'm into it.
Yeah.
You owe me.
I know.
You owe me a tarot card reading.
I would love to. I mean, I think what people don't always realize about tarot is that like, it's not that different from the Enneagram. Like each card represents sort of a slice of the human experience, I would say. And so there are these archetypes the same way that the Enneagram is archetypes. That's all it is. Right. And so what tarot is saying is that we have all these archetypes within us, but there are some that are going to be like we're more drawn to than others. And so we tend to pick those more. That's definitely been true for me. There's like some cards that I always pick and others that I've never, ever picked. And I think that that's really all it is. It's like, what archetypes are we being invited to pay attention to right now? And what are we like invited to kind of close the book on or kind of move away from? So I'd be happy to give you a reading. It's a fun thing to do for sure.
Upon reflection, I definitely owe you. You don't owe me anything. So I would love you
to, it's fun for me. It's fun for me.
Just one thing you mentioned, kind of being under a tree and doing those tarot readings. So I was just speaking to another sabbatical alum yesterday, who hopefully I'll get a chance to interview. And she was talking about how her visual for the sabbatical was like, thinking about her life as like a tree, and like the tree had kind of like grown a little bit like sideways, or maybe like the leaves or branches on one side had like developed a lot more. And she was like excited to like prune them back and help kind of like restore the balance of her tree, which I thought was a pretty cool visual. Yeah, pretty cool visual.
Yes, it's just where you're putting your energy and attention.
Yeah. So as we kind of wrap up here, just looking back at the notes, what were your favorite parts? Like, what would you recommend doing from like a strategy perspective for folks that are thinking about taking a sabbatical? I mean, especially because you did it during COVID. So I feel like it's a whole new era, right? In the past couple of years of like travel and what you can do, what you can't do.
Well, what was cool about what we did, and we did do this on purpose, was that we kind of chased like the nice weather. So we only had like a couple weeks where we were in like cold weather. And part of that was like where we chose to be and kind of the timing of things. So we were outdoors a lot, and we went to like, we everywhere we went, especially with like a toddler, like he had never eaten in a restaurant before until, the end of the trip. So we spent a lot of time in these like spaces that really cool, like these towns or cities that had lots of outdoor places to eat, like New Orleans, Austin, Portland, Maine, like Northern Michigan has like a ton of like restaurants that are basically farms where kids can just run wild. So he didn't need to go in anywhere basically for like basically the whole trip until we got to Mexico. So that was really great. So like deciding what kind of weather and vibe you want, I actually think it matters. So we actually thought about that in terms of like, we did this perimeter of the US. We went to Puerto Rico in early October, and we got back to New York in November. And those like 2 weeks getting down to New Orleans were like the only 2 weeks we had that were cold. I think that a road trip is like not for the faint of heart. We couldn't really think of another way to do it. I think the benefit was that we got to see so many friends and family, like even just like, hey, we're going to be in Atlanta for one night, like come hang out. And I got to see like my, a dear friend of mine. And like, there's a lot of transition, and living out of your car is like kind of tiring sometimes. So like where we could spend at least a week, we felt like more grounded. And then of course, in the few places where we spent more than a week, Michigan, Maine, Puerto Rico and Mexico, that was like really nice. And we got to like a deeper level of relaxation, I would say. But we spent a week in Austin. We spent a week in New Orleans. We spent a week in North Carolina. We spent a week a lot of places, but like we also spent 2 nights a lot of places or 1 night. So I would say like just think about how much moving around you want to be doing and whether you want to be like really like leaning into a place or whether you want to be thinking about seeing, like we really wanted to see a ton of friends. We were like, oh, we need to see these people. I don't regret doing it that way, but I told Matt like next time we can't do it that way. Like with 2 kids, like forget it. You know what I mean? But River was a champion and slept in probably like 60 different places. And we became really good at like moving around.
How about like specific for folks that have young kiddos? What did you learn? How would you do it differently?
Oh man, I know. I feel like I should like write a little course on like traveling with a toddler. You know, I don't know what I would do differently necessarily. I think again, like we spent a lot of time like in random parks and cities and all of that. But you know, I think we really tried to intersperse like nature with cities so that he could have both experiences. Like being in Puerto Rico was incredible because like all you do every day is you like get up, you like go to a beach, you hang out, you come back, take a nap, maybe you go out one more time to kind of like have dinner or something like that. It's like very, very chill. Same deal in Michigan. And our son really loves like nature and being outside. Mexico is an amazing place to be with a kid because they love kids in Mexico. So we felt very like, I feel like parents are like celebrities. Like everyone loves you. Everyone loves your kid. You can take your kid into like the coolest, hippest restaurant and people are like, hey, that's awesome. Do you want some like toys to play with? They can be on the floor being crazy and no one cares. People actually love it. That was really great too. And so we kind of interspersed just like a lot of like hanging out in different places with like going to places that had like a discovery museum or a children's museum or something that would be like specifically for him. And of course, when we were in cities, my husband like doesn't love like shopping, walking around, doing that whole thing. And I love it. So we relieved each other. So I would say like he did some days of fishing in North Carolina and I was with my kid. I got to walk around New York and pretend I lived there, which is like my favorite thing to do. So we got to do that. Montreal was also a great place to bring kids, I would say. And then the last thing I would say is like, you know, don't be afraid to get like some childcare here or there if you need it, you know, like Urban Sitter, care.com, like those. I can't even really, I mean, we did actually get a lot of babysitters in Mexico through some random referrals and people that people knew. So I definitely recommend like taking some time for yourself if you can, if you have small kids on your sabbatical with you.
I want to ask 2 more questions. One, what do you think Matt's reflections are on his sabbatical? Like how is he approaching work, life differently? Hope to get a chance to talk to him.
For him, yeah. Work is TBD. I think he's still just kind of like getting back at it. I think he really felt like for him, it was so valuable to be able to kind of go with the flow. And he's someone who like needs a lot, like he doesn't want to be overscheduled. He's like kind of like more on the introverted side of things. So I think for him, he was saying like, I really want to maintain this idea of like, we just are intuitive about the way we spend our time. We don't let like life and our calendars like run us. Like we make decisions, like we own our time. As much as we can. So that was like something that he was saying. And I think for him too, like he just really, I mean, he and my son have like such a beautiful relationship. And I think he just appreciated being able to like and I think he also did his own work that he didn't even realize he was going to have to do about like decoupling from the constant, like, I need to be productive. I need to do. Mm-hmm. He's like, yeah, around like month 3 when I was just like at another playground with River and just kind of like staring at the sky. Like I really was like, oh, okay, I actually think I made it. I'm done. I'm like, I'm decoupled. So I think for him, like he really wants to maintain that sense of just being present with our son and in life. He's good at that. But everybody needs to be reminded to do that, I would say.
Awesome. Okay, last question. You said you read 25 books. What? Name all of them. No, I'm just kidding. What are like some?
I'm
of your
like, you
favorites?
can go on my Goodreads profile and see everything I read. I really got into memoirs. I read Crying in H Mart, which I know was like a big fan, like a fan favorite for a lot of people. I read Circe and Song of Achilles, which are also like a lot of people love, and they were both amazing. I read Jessica Simpson's memoir, Don't Judge Me, but it was really a person I respect a lot told me to read it, and it was actually like really it was really enjoyable.
I'll just edit that out. Don't worry.
I found the Libby app on
Oh my gosh.
I got a Kindle.
It's a game changer.
Yeah, totally. Because I was like, I'm not gonna buy this. Like, I'm not trying to give her conglomerate like another, or Amazon or whatever, but I am going to get it for free and read it. And like, that was so fulfilling. I was like, this is just fun, like reading just for fun. So I let myself read, like I read books about coaching, and I read Burnout and kind of like heavier stuff, but I also just let myself read like some fun fiction that was just like, I read Detransition Baby, like stuff like that. It was really fun. Cool. So I really loved the Kindle. Highly recommend.
Awesome. As a aspiring author, I can't fully support Libby.
So my best
all of your
friend,
book purchases.
My best friend from high school, I was at her house and she was like, "What are you doing with that?" And I was like, "I'm sorry," because she's an author. So I actually also did buy some books, and do want to do both. Well, I'll obviously do both, but yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, folks can find you at liaizenberg.com, right?
Yeah,
and
that's
learn
right.
about your coaching and advising, and soon to be tarot card archetype advising. But
totally.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. This was so fun, DJ, and I love what you're doing. And it was such a serendipity to get to meet you right at that moment that I was setting off. So thank you for everything you're doing and all the energy you're putting out in the world.
Totally. Thank you so much. Awesome.
All right. Bye.
All right. See you there.